You're at a barbecue, holding a beer you didn't ask for, smiling at someone who just said their name 2 seconds ago, and it's already gone, vanished, like the syllables never even hit your brain. They're still talking, you're still nodding, but there's a quiet panic running underneath your face, because you know in about 90 seconds you'll have to introduce them to your friend, and you've got nothing. Most people will tell you it's because you weren't paying attention. That's the lazy answer. The real reason has almost nothing to do with focus and almost everything to do with what your nervous system is actually doing in that moment. If this hits somewhere a little too close, drop a single word in the comments. We're about to walk through what's really happening when names slip out of your head and why it's not the personality flaw people keep telling you it is. Because the people who forget names aren't dumb, they aren't shallow, they aren't bad with people. Most of the time, they're carrying something underneath the conversation that nobody else in the room can see. Here's the first thing nobody tells you. When someone says their name, your brain has to do 2 things at once. Hold the sound, hold the person. And if your nervous system is overloaded, only one of those survives. Names are abstract, faces are emotional. Your brain isn't broken, it's just triaging. It keeps the data that feels alive and drops the data that feels like a sticky note. That sticky note is usually the name. Watch what happens the second someone introduces themselves. Your face holds steady, your mouth says nice to meet you, but behind your eyes, your brain is already running a private background check on this person. You're scanning their tone, their posture, whether their smile reaches the eyes, whether they want something from you, whether you're safe in this conversation. By the time all that finishes, the name is already gone. That isn't a memory problem, that's a vigilance problem. And vigilance, no matter how polished it looks from the outside, is always a sign that some part of you learned a long time ago that people aren't automatically safe.
Think about who actually remembers names easily. Salespeople, politicians, the host at a restaurant who calls you buddy 40 times. People who've been trained to treat names as currency, not as connection. You're not running that program. You're running a deeper one. You're trying to read who someone really is before you bother filing their label. And that single instinct says more about you than you probably realize. There's a specific kind of person this happens to. Sensitive, observant, often quietly tired. The kind who walks into a room and feels the temperature of it before they feel the introductions. Take Ethan, a guy I used to work with. Brilliant in meetings, could read a client's hesitation from across the table, but ask him the name of the intern he'd worked next to for a month and he'd freeze for a solid 5 seconds. It wasn't disrespect, it was bandwidth. Ethan was using 90% of his cognitive energy reading the room, the boss, the unspoken hierarchy. There simply wasn't anything left over for, "Hi, I'm Madison." Here's the quotable part. People who forget names aren't bad at people. They're often too good at people. They're processing the human in front of them at such a high resolution that the label feels almost insulting to the data. And this is where it turns. Because most people aren't actually meeting each other. They're meeting each other's labels. Name, job, city, marital status. A 4-line LinkedIn intro pretending to be a human being. You're trying to meet the actual person underneath. So when their name evaporates, it's not because you don't care. It's because the part of you that cares is busy with something more honest than syllables. But the world doesn't reward that. The world rewards the smooth handshake, the fast recall, the great to see you again, Tyler. And when you blank, people feel it and they take it personally, even when it has nothing to do with them. That's the social cost nobody warns you about. Forgetting a name in this culture isn't read as a quirk, it's read as a verdict. They walk away thinking you didn't find them important enough to keep.
And inside, you're crushed by that. Because the actual truth is the opposite.
You were so tuned in to who they were that you forgot the first piece of paperwork. But you can't explain that without sounding like you're making excuses. So you start overcompensating. You repeat their name 3 times after they say it. You write it in your phone the second they turn away. You drill it like a vocabulary test before a second meeting, and it still slips. Because the fix isn't mechanical, the mechanism is emotional. You're not failing at memory, you're succeeding at something else, something the productivity guys on TikTok don't have a category for yet. Let's talk about the second pattern, the introvert overload. Picture yourself walking into a party where you know maybe 2 people. Within 10 minutes, 4 strangers have introduced themselves to you in rapid fire. Marcus, Olivia, Jordan, Harper. Your brain isn't filing those. Your brain is running survival math. Where's the exit? Who looks safe? How long do I have to stay before I can leave without being rude about it? By the time you finish that internal scan, all 4 names have been overwritten by the louder file your nervous system is keeping, which is, how do I get through the next 2 hours without performing a version of myself I'll regret on the drive home? That's not a memory failure, that's an energy failure. You only have so much social bandwidth, and small talk is the most expensive bandwidth there is. Names are the first thing that gets sacrificed at that altar. Here's the third pattern, and it's a quiet one. Emotional dissociation in real time. Some people forget names because, on a deeper level, they aren't fully in the conversation. They're standing 1 foot outside their own body. You smile, you nod, you ask the right questions, but there's a thin pane of glass between you and the moment. You're watching yourself socialize from somewhere just behind your own eyes. Names don't stick to glass. This usually shows up in people who grew up in homes where being fully present wasn't safe, where you had to keep one eye on the room at all times. That hyper-awareness costs something. The cost shows up in moments that look small.
Tell me in the comments if you've felt that. The strange feeling of being in a conversation but not really there. Smiling on autopilot while some quieter part of you is doing math you don't even consciously understand. Pattern 4. The status filter. Watch how easily you remember the name of the loudest person in any new group. The alpha, the host, the one with the strong opinions and the magnetic energy. Now, watch how often you blank on the quieter person standing right next to them. That's not coincidence. Your brain is filing names by perceived social weight, even when you'd swear out loud that you don't think that way. It's uncomfortable to admit, but every brain runs a tiny status filter. The names that survive are usually the names attached to people who could affect your safety, your status, or your sense of belonging in that specific room. The names that get dropped are usually the people your nervous system unconsciously decided are low stakes, which is kind of brutal when you say it out loud, especially when you realize other people are doing it to you. Pattern 5. The self-protection blank. Here's a strange one. Sometimes you forget a name because somewhere underneath you don't fully want to let this person in yet. Names are doors, and not every door is one you want to open. Think about Chloe, who keeps blanking on the name of the new guy her sister keeps trying to set her up with. She remembers his job, his car, the story about his dog, but the name keeps disappearing like a stone dropped in water. That's not a glitch, that's a quiet refusal. Some part of her is keeping him at the threshold because letting his name land would mean letting him become real in her life, and she's not ready for it, even if she can't articulate why. Names create permanence. Forgetting them, on some level, keeps things provisional. It keeps the relationship in draft mode. It lets you keep the option open of pretending none of this fully happened in case it ends badly. Pattern 6. The overthinking spiral. You meet someone, they say their name, and in that exact half second, your brain jumps 3 steps ahead. What do they think of me? Did my voice sound weird? Was my handshake too soft?
By the time you've finished interrogating yourself, the name is gone. Not because you didn't hear it, but because you weren't really there to hear it. You were inside your own head, auditioning for their approval. Here's the quotable part. Self-consciousness is the thief of names. The more anxious you are about being liked, the less you actually absorb the person in front of you. You're not meeting them, you're performing for them. And the cruel irony is that this is the exact thing that makes them feel slightly invisible to you. They can sense, without knowing how, that you weren't fully there. The name slipping is the symptom, the absence is the wound. Pattern 7. The empath fatigue blank. If your job, your family, or your friend group has you absorbing everyone else's emotional weather all day, by the time you meet a new person at 6 p.m., your buffer is full. There's no room left to file new identities. Your brain is busy holding the texture of your friend's divorce, your boss's mood, your sister's drama, the weight of 1,000 small unspoken adjustments you've been making since morning. So when Ryan from accounting introduces himself at the work happy hour, your brain politely says, "Received," but doesn't actually save the file. It can't. The drive is full, and nobody around you can see the drive at all. That's not rudeness, that's emotional saturation. You can't keep absorbing other people's interior worlds for free without something giving way. Names are usually the cheapest thing your system is willing to drop first. So when somebody jokingly calls you bad with names, what they're really pointing at, without knowing it, is the invisible labor you've been performing for everyone around you all day. They just don't have a word for it. Now we go deeper, because none of this started in adulthood. The pattern of where your attention naturally goes was set a long time ago in a much smaller version of you. If you grew up in a house where the emotional weather was unpredictable, you learned to read people before you learned to label them. You were tracking moods, not names, tones, not titles, threat, not introduction.
That child didn't have the luxury of, "Hi, I'm Dad, what's your favorite color?" That child was scanning the door to figure out which version of Dad just walked in. That kind of scanning becomes muscle memory. It never really shuts off. 20 years later, you walk into a happy hour and your nervous system runs the exact same scan. Who in this room is safe? Who's pretending? Who's about to shift? Who needs handling? And the name? The name is a luxury, not a priority. Drop a word in the comments if you grew up doing this, reading the room before you'd even taken your shoes off. That kind of childhood doesn't just shape your memory, it shapes what your memory is even allowed to care about. There's also the loneliness layer. People who got used to being a little invisible as kids, often without realizing it, expect to be forgotten. So when they don't catch someone else's name, somewhere underneath it almost feels fair, as if the universe is just keeping the books even. They forgot you 1,000 times growing up. Now you're forgetting them in tiny, socially acceptable doses at parties and meetings, and nobody has to admit anyone is hurt. That's the part nobody puts into words. Forgetting names is sometimes a quiet echo of having been forgotten yourself, of having grown up suspecting that people don't really hold you in their heads when you leave the room. So you stopped expecting them to hold you, and without meaning to, you stopped fully holding them. It became mutual, polite, manageable, a way of keeping every relationship at the exact distance your nervous system can survive. That's not a flaw, that's an old strategy. It kept you safe when fully landing in connection wasn't an option. The work isn't to shame yourself for it. The work is to notice it's still running long after you needed it. Here's where it shifts. Once you see that forgetting names isn't a deficiency, but a side effect of how deeply you're processing people, the shame around it starts to loosen. You stop treating it like a defect. You start noticing what you do remember. The exact look on someone's face when they mentioned their dad, the way their voice cracked on a specific word, the thing they said they wanted that they then quietly contradicted with the next sentence.
That's not nothing. That's the deepest layer of attention there is. Most people would trade 100 remembered names for being seen by someone who actually noticed those things. You've been giving that gift and apologizing for it. The shift isn't to become someone who never forgets a name. The shift is to stop using your forgetfulness as evidence against yourself. It was never the proof of your shallowness, it was the receipt of your depth. You can still build small bridges, repeating the name once when they say it, writing it down later,
asking again without shame the second time. These aren't fixes, they're just kindness layered on top of an already kind brain. But the deeper move is this: stop apologizing for being more interested in the person than the label. Stop pretending to be a smoother version of yourself just because the world rewards a different operating system than yours. Because the people who really matter, the ones worth keeping, will eventually notice that you remember the things about them that nobody else does. Their tone, their fear, their unfinished sentence from 3 weeks ago. And those people will forgive the slip on their name every single time. Because being deeply seen, even imperfectly, is rarer than being correctly labeled. One is filing, the other is intimacy. The trick isn't to hack your memory. The trick is to stop interpreting your own attention as a flaw. Your attention isn't broken, it's just pointed somewhere most people aren't brave enough to look. Here's the hard truth: you will keep forgetting names, some of them anyway. Not because you don't care, but because your system was built to track something deeper than syllables, and that's not changing on a Tuesday. And here's the freeing one: the next time a name slips, don't flinch. Don't apologize like you've committed something. Just smile, ask again, and let yourself be the kind of person who'd rather meet a soul than memorize a tag. Because the people who forget names aren't the careless ones. They're often the ones still trying, after everything, to actually see who's in front of them. And in a world of polite strangers, that might be the rarest thing left.